Hi, this is Andre. Thanks for checking out Synthisophy. Synthisophy is integrating the wisdoms of history, based on fact and truth, into our present culture. Let's take a look today at Chapter 20, Far from Our Roots. Or more specifically, we are very far from our genetic roots. And note that the following will be quotes from earlier referred to sources and comments added by myself. Recall our discussion in Chapter 11, The Tribe in Modern Society. Quote, hominids that cooperated with one another and punished those who didn't must have outfought, outhunted, and outbred everyone else. This genetically evolved and biologically selected tribal approach over millions of years, perhaps prominent at the exit of Homo sapiens out of Africa 70,000 years ago, led to the dominance of this human species and the extinction of others. These are the hominids that we as modern humans are descended from. In 2007, anthropologist Christopher Bohm published an analysis of 154 foraging societies that were deemed to be representative of our ancestral past. And one of their most common traits was the absence of wealth disparities between individuals. Another was the absence of arbitrary authority. Quote, social life is politically egalitarian in that there is always a low tolerance by a group's mature males for one of their number dominating, bossing, or denigrating others. He continued, the human consciousness evolved in the middle to late Pleistocene as a result of hunting large game. This required cooperative band-level hunting and sharing of meat. Recall the catastrophes and responses mentioned in Modern Crises Chapter 12 and Tribal Instinct? What catastrophes seem to do, sometimes in the span of a few minutes, is turn back the clock on a million years of social evolution. Self-interest gets subsumed into group interest because there is no survival outside of group survival. That genetically evolved and chemically existent tribal instinct is revealed, and that creates a bond that many people sorely miss. Recall the warrior ethos from Chapter 13? Place the mission first. Never accept defeat. Never quit. Never leave a fallen comrade. This warrior ethos exactly describes the evolutionarily and genetically selected and now neurologically hardwired tribal instinct that was necessary for survival and resulted in Homo sapiens becoming the dominant and now the only human species on the earth. Recall the vignette describing Chapter 7, Neuroreality, about a group of Homo habilis 2 million years ago, seeing a group of Homo rudolfensi that they've never encountered before. From that time until 70,000 BC, perhaps this warrior ethos had evolved into the dominant genetically selected trait that led to the exit of Homo sapiens from Africa and for them to overcome all other hominid species and become the only human species now on Earth. As stated in the tribe in modern society, these Homo sapiens must have outfought, outhunted, and outbred everyone else. This genetically evolved and selected warrior ethos, perhaps prominent at the exit of Homo sapiens out of Africa 70,000 years ago, led to the dominance of this human species and the extinction of others. These are the hominids that modern humans are descended from, and it may well be because of the warrior ethos. Recall soldiers in an army platoon are functioning as an early hominid tribal unit for survival of the group. All are equal. There is no wealth. Survival of the group is the raison d'etre, which leads to altruism and selflessness. Recall the story of the soldiers in the trenches of World War I. The enemy lofts a hand grenade in the trench. The closest soldier dives onto the grenade. It goes off. He dies, but the platoon goes on. All for one, one for all. Survival of the tribe, survival of the species. This ethos resulted in our becoming the dominant and only human species on the planet, and is still hardwired into our evolutionary genetic consciousness. Recall John Musgrave a Vietnam veteran in Ken Burns' Vietnam War series. He described how after being shot through the chest, his fellow soldiers risked their lives under continued heavy enemy fire to bring him out alive. They dragged him for a few dozen feet, then laid on top of him as the firing increased and the bullets whizzed right over their heads. They dragged him a little bit further, over and over, until reaching safety. That's the Army ethos. This was John Musgrave, who after the Kent State shootings joined the anti-Vietnam protests. Those were quotes from Chapter 14. Recall our discussion of skinwalkers in Chapter 15. Rampages are usually defined as attacks where people are randomly targeted and 4 or more are killed in one place, usually shot to death by a lone gunman. As such, those crimes conform almost exactly to the kind of threat that the Navajo seemed most to fear on the reservation. Murder and mayhem committed by an individual who has rejected all social bonds and attacks people at their most vulnerable and unprepared. For modern society, that would mean not in their blog hogans, but in movie theaters, schools, shopping malls, places of worship, or simply walking down the street. Recall the list of skinwalkers and their shooting rampages in the USA over the last 30 years. Note that from 1990 through 1999, there were 8 mass shootings. From 2000 through 2009, there were 9. From 2010 through 2019, there were 37. Why does it appear that over the last 10 years our society is generating a sharp increase in skinwalkers, individuals committing murder and mayhem who have rejected all social bonds and attack people at their most vulnerable and unprepared? Perhaps it's because, as Sebastian Junger stated, this shows how completely detribalized our country has become. As individuals in society, it appears we are now very far from our evolutionary and genetically selected and now neurologically hardwired roots. Modern skinwalkers, discussed in Chapter 17, are individuals and corporations that harm or kill thousands, if not millions of people, but make millions, if not billions of dollars for themselves doing it. Cancer cells are normal cells within the human body that suddenly start to replicate and grow uncontrollably. They become malignant and can seriously harm the individual, but with proper treatment can sometimes be kept in check. However, if left untreated, and many times even with treatment, cancer can overcome and kill the host. So let's consider some modern skinwalkers as a form of societal cancer. Here are examples of such previously mentioned in Chapter 17. Defense industry fraud, 2,000 years per year per household. Unemployment, welfare, Medicare and Medicaid fraud, $3,000 per year per household. Insurance industry fraud, $5,000 per year per household. The financial industry and its real estate collapse in 2008, $45,000 per citizen. The pharmaceutical industry and the opioid epidemic, killing their own and making millions of dollars. The tobacco industry, killing their own and making billions of dollars. The fossil fuel industry, killing their own, wreaking havoc on the planet, and making billions of dollars. These malignant forms of social cancer are kept in check, except perhaps the fossil fuel industry, at the cost of billions of dollars and millions of lives. As individuals, societies, and the whole of humankind on Earth, we are presently dealing with the malignant forms of societal cancer and environmental cancer in our midst. How could this happen? We would not be the first to damage our environment to our own detriment. In North America 5,000 years ago, larger wild animals like the mammoth, the saber-toothed tiger, and aurochs, which are cows but bigger, went extinct, most probably due to overhunting by the Paleolithic tribes that had migrated there from Eurasia 20,000 years ago. Recall Mesopotamia, the first civilization in what was then called the Fertile Crescent, stretching now over the areas of Syria and Iraq. That area is now mostly desert, with degraded lands and diminished crop yields as a result of continuous farming over the course of thousands of years, which caused the topsoil to be blown away by the wind or washed away by the rain. Recall the catastrophe on Easter Island. The inhabitants there, unknowingly over generations, depleted and degraded their limited resources on the island, which led to a significant decrease in population, from 15,000 to 2,000 over the course of 100 years. As individuals in society, it appears we are now very far from our evolutionary and genetically selected, and now our neurologically hardwired roots. Recall all for one for all, survival of the tribe, survival of the species. This ethos resulted in our becoming the dominant and only human species on the planet, and is still hardwired into our evolutionary genetic consciousness. We are very far from our genetic roots. The question is, why are we very far from our genetic roots? Let's consider change in society over the past 4 million years, from Australopithecus to the advent of agriculture and civilization, which means from Paleolithic times, which is the baseline describing tribe, the neural reality of the platoon mind, that is the ancient evolutionary and genetically selected mindset of the hunter-gatherer area that resulted in the success of the survival of Homo sapiens and the extinction of others. Let's compare that to the last 10,000 years of modern times. Revolutions resulting in degrees of change from the tribal baseline are agriculture, 10,000 years ago, which led to the advent of civilization, 6,500 years ago, which then led to science and the scientific revolution, the scientific way of thinking, 1620, which led to the Industrial Revolution, 1760, and then the exponential growth of the human world population since 1800, from 500 million to 7 billion, as we can see here. Spike. And then the digital revolution, which started in 1980 in the information age, which we are presently in now. So let's consider degrees of societal change through each revolution. From our Paleolithic past to agriculture, going from a small, say 5,200 people, mobile and physically demanding tribal group, to a larger, say hundreds or perhaps thousands of people in a more stationary, small city or town-like organization. Let's say that this would be 30 degrees of change from our Paleolithic past to agriculture. The next change would be agriculture to civilization, going from a small city or town-like environment to a huge nation-like state complete with laws and expected behaviors. Consider Mesopotamia and Hammurabi's Code. Let's call this change 30 degrees of change. Then we have the birth of science and the scientific way of thinking to analyze and understand the world. Consider that as another 30 degrees of change. And we have the Industrial Revolution, another 30 degrees of change. After that, we have the exponential growth of the human world population since 1800, from 500 million to 7 billion. Consider that another 30 degrees of change. And from there, we're now in the digital age, the digital revolution, and the information age. Let's consider that another 30 degrees of change. Note that these make up 180 degrees of change in 10,000 years, from our evolutionarily and genetically selected and now neurologically hardwired tribal instinct that was developed for the survival and the dominance of we as Homo sapiens from 4 million years ago to 10,000 years ago. So, 10,000 years of modern society divided by 4 million years of tribal society equals 0.0025, or 1/4 of 1%. In the last 1/4 of 1% of our time in existence, humanity now lives in a society that is 180 degrees different from the one it evolutionarily created in the previous 99.75% of its earlier human existence. As another visual, picture the world population. Take a look at this graph. Notice the spike in population in the last 200 years. This is over the course of the last 10,000 years. But more importantly, picture this baseline extending for the length of a football field. That would put us in the last 4 million years of our evolution. So picture this line, the length of one football field, and then right here, we can see the huge population burst. Picture in your head one football field and this thin spike right here. Picture that in your head. You can visualize a huge change in a very small period of time in human history. So as can be seen, we are now very far from our genetic roots. How are we as a society handling and the human brain processing this huge change? Read chapter 21 for insights on this question and more.